Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojó ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of the Chronicles of Pax Dei. Welcome. I am Phantom X, joined as usual by Diggs and the legendary Neurotoxin, and we have a fourth. Lethality has joined us for a new show. This is very exciting. It's not often that we get a new MMORPG to begin theory crafting about, but here we are. So welcome everyone, and hello y'all. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Hey
and I gotta say, we've been getting a lot of new MMOs coming around these days. It's been looking real interesting. The opportunities, what sort of things are coming around. It seems like there's a little bit of a lull in the action, and then they're starting to come back in a big way.
Yeah,
not that MMOs weren't being made, but like it feels like everyone's trying to take that next step and do something a little bigger and better than, you know, what the Meridian 59 to WoW spectrum kind of then spawned and branched out to be.
Well, a lot of MMORPGs are being worked on. And I'm not sure. This isn't even an RPG, right? It's a social sandbox.
It's an interesting sort of game.
I don't think they call it an RPG.
That is an interesting question. It has been talked about as an MMO and a social sandbox. You're correct. I don't know that anything I've watched nor read has mentioned MMORPG. I suspect a lot of that comes from things like no NPCs, no quests, none of the sort of traditional things that you see in an MMORPG, but stuff that we will get to venture through and discuss over the next however many episodes it takes us to get to the release of the game, which is the biggest question. Today's really just mostly going to be about, you know, our expectations, things that we saw that we're excited about, but also just a little bit about the game. I'm sure a lot of people already know about this, but you know, I think it's good on the first episode to kind of go over everything. This is from Mainframe Industries. Pax Dei was Lethality. When was you were the first to clue in on this? When was it? 2020?
Yeah, I think this came on the radar right about the same time, you know, as the pandemic. I think around March, there was an article that popped up on some funding, and I have this. I like tracking all this stuff, and I'm not sure how I heard about it at first, but it was definitely a funding related article back in March of 2020, and it really sounded, sounded promising because they were talking about things like, you know, I mean, it may sound a little buzzwordy, but, you know, things like cloud gaming, and they were saying certain things just that made me think like, okay, this seems to be one of those virtual worlds I want to track. You know, I'm going to keep it on a radar and see what happens. And, and then, as we learn more, which we'll talk about today, probably about the pedigree of some of the developers and where they're coming from. It's got a lot of things that, that are kind of lining up, some, not just, sizable investment, but specificically who's investing, who's working on it. And so it's been on the radar for a while now. And luckily this year they've revealed it to us. So we get to speculate a lot more officially now.
So I would say that I'm typically actually looking. So I consider Neuro to be a game hoe, and Phantom is not too far behind him. I normally I might find a couple of games per year that I like to play, and when I do find one, I'll play the heck out of it. You said you were looking for a virtual world that you want to track, and that seems more like a Meow. is in your interest than an MMORPG? Like you're looking for a multiplayer, evolving online world. Yeah,
Yes,
not
yes, that
necessarily
is.
an RPG.
Yeah, that is something that's been described in the past in certain circles. But yeah, I just feel in a general sense, in a general direction, I'm waiting for this genre to open up to some of those things we all thought it could be 15 years ago, and whether that's an RPG or whether that's just a persistent level of persistence we haven't seen. But yeah, that's kind of my sort of focus for things.
Yeah. So what I'm looking for, so what I really hope to do, what I like to do in MMORPGs is I do like to play the role in terms of character acting. So I like to be immersed in the character and do at least some low key character acting. And I'm really trying to um, live out the experiences that I might have as the protagonist of the fantasy novels that I used to read. Could be a sci-fi novel too, but in that case, I prefer to be in a multiplayer ship closer to like Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica, something like that. And I don't think I've quite seen that in the science fiction offerings yet for MMORPGs. But um, so um, yeah, I'm looking for a world that will allow me to do some character acting and have some of the hero's journey in terms of developing power, starting off small and building, building, building. Um, and then lately, I think this concept of building your own village and city is going to keep people playing and have people more invested in defending their space. Um, Keep players more immersed other than just doing quest after quest after quest. So what are the aspects of the virtual world that are enticing? What are you looking forward to doing in the virtual world, Lethality?
Well, I think you sort of hit on some of it at the tail end of what you said there. This idea of building a civilization, and sort of civilization is maybe a big word, a society that in a lot of ways follows some sort of norm that we're familiar with. Obviously, in a fantastical setting or something where there are constraints, but also potentially things like magic. I think that's interesting, and I like the idea of persistence. That if I'm building this city and this has systems that interact with other systems, and particularly as other players build their civilizations, how can we interact together? And we were talking a bit about this sort of pre-show. Not everything always has to be just about war or combat or sieging. It also, the lives we live every day are also very much about just operating that society. How do we work our day to day in there? And I think there's a lot of interest to be had there from these virtual worlds. Maybe like Pax Day, hopefully that we can take from that. And I've made a post somewhere on the PAX Day forums for a light recruiting. With the forums are on their Discord, by the way. Recruiting and all about this idyllic village and town I want to build up. And it really has nothing to do with overtaking other villages and towns, but I'd like there to be a virtual world that allows me to pursue those things, even if that doesn't mean I have the best loot or the this or the that. It's just, is there a pursuit in a virtual world are we finally rounding the corner where there's going to be more than singular or secondary goals for players?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an explorer first, so I usually try to uncover as much of the map as I possibly can every time I level. So I go as far as I can until I get one shot by the mobs, but there's no NPCs in this game, so what does that mean? But anyway, um, and then when I think about what's going to bring me back to my home city, in a game where we have static cities that are already built and they're going to be there forever. I think you don't have as much connection to them, but one of the things that EverQuest Next mentioned is there might be earthquakes, these natural disasters, even just not even thinking about um, monster hordes coming to try and destroy the city, although that might be one thing. Might not be a thing in PAX Day, but if I've built the city and that city that I've built could be destroyed, it seems more likely that I'm going to want to come back. Even if I'm not there, I'm going to try and run back to defend it. And then I'm also going to try and come back to rebuild the parts that have been damaged. And that seems to be a thing that can keep us going. With EverQuest, I really want to be able to EverQuest. I would like the quest. I don't want to hit max level and all my quests run out. I want to always have something to do in the game. And that's the type of thing that seems like will keep us going in the game. So those are really the kind of MMORPGs that I've been looking forward to these past 10 years, ever since EverQuest Next kind of broached that idea. I don't think we've really found an MMORPG that has that system in it yet. But yeah, I'm looking more for the co-op than the conflict, more for the co-op than the competition, actually, too.
Well, I think a lot of what you just comment on pulls from the development side. So who's actually making this? So Mainframe was formed in Iceland and Finland. I think they have an office in France as well, but largely by CCP developers, I think from actually original developers. And when you look at EVE Online and sort of the stories that it's created, and that seems to be what's being done here as ways to bring communities together, make sure everyone actually has a role, feels like they can do something. Because I've always said EVE Online has, and I linked in our Discord today, like I forget, it was like top 5 or so, I don't know, 5 stories that had happened. It was from like 2021. But I routinely would read these stories in like PC Magazine about player-driven content, player-driven stories. Somebody forgot to pay rent, and it's led to like a massive galaxy-sized, fight. Another one, there was somebody that was hired to assassinate a leader of a I don't know what they call them, but guild or whatnot, led to like $300 and something thousand worth of ships destroyed over the course of several weeks of an ongoing fight. So, I've been looking for something like that in a fantasy setting, either low fantasy or high fantasy. That seems to be a lot of what we're getting here early on, and I think that comes from where the developers come from. And they have a lot from a lot of different teams. So, this is as a cloud native process. So they've brought in a lot of different people. And it sounds like when you look at some of the interviews, things that people really take away, or from the investors about Mainframe Industries, is the team that they've built is a very solid team of I think they have like an Amazon Web Services person. They have mobile people, MMORPG people, console gaming. I think I read where the average span in the industry for their devs are 15 years. That's a long time to be in this space. So they seem to be surrounding themselves with a really good team. But yeah, being a lot of this is pulled from the same people that brought EVE Online. I'm super excited about the potential stories that can kind of come up from this.
Yeah, it's EVE Online that makes me not excited, because I don't play EVE Online, and I have no interest in playing EVE Online. So I have a feeling I'm not going to play PAX Day either. I think it's going to have the same deal breaker, similar to Ashes of Creation. It's going to have, and EVE Online, it's going to have areas where it's PvP is, you're flagged for PvP, and I don't play games like that. But I'm curious to see if there will be. The main reason is to try and find a game that we will play together, and this is a possibility. But we'll have to see how much I'd be willing to play this game, since they have zones similar to EVE, which is a deal breaker for me. But
I don't really know that it's going to be quite so bad for people that are looking for a PvE experience. The thing is that the player housing is going to be in the Heartlands, which is the PvE area. So if you, Diggs, like building and exploring and being a housemaker, I could see you having your entire gameplay experience as a decorator and a builder, that people give you the materials and they give you the permissions and they say, Diggs, you're amazing. I commission you this amount of material of money for you to use materials available here, plus whatever you want to throw in to build and decorate this place. You're the man. We know that you're the best. And through no combat whatsoever, as an interior decorator, as someone who builds and furnishes and decorates, you could be the guy who's known as and specializes in making those really cool, like, Aboriginal tribal looking houses, the things with the fur on the outsides and the, very like rough hewn and, hand worked sort of craftsmanship to it. That's the sort of thing that I would see being the experience that keeps you coming in day after day after day. Things where you're able to play on and do expression in different ways, and maybe you get some clues about some runes, or you'll be able to learn about some new crafting styles. Sure, there might be some risk, a bit of a PvP risk, and maybe a loss risk if you go in the area. So instead of strapping on your best and fanciest gear, you just throw on some gutter gray stuff, just enough to be able to take a few blows. You go out with a couple of friends who believe in you, Diggs, as an interior decorator, and know that you, Diggs, are going out there wearing gray gutter clothes, and there's nothing they can take from you by killing you. So, it's going to be a low-risk sort of thing. Even more, it could be the sort of thing where it's not so far out that it's within an area where the Axis Mundi records won't track that these people have ganked you, and then when they come back to town, they got a fine to pay or something, and you get reparations for, damages or whatever. That's the sort of stuff that I'd like to see, know a little bit more about the systems, but I don't think it's going to be like take one step over the line out of the Heartlands and there's like 20 grog hunter whatevers that are just sitting there. They've got their traps down, they're in the shadows. It's like, all right, it's that Diggs guy. I don't like him in other games and I don't like him here. I'm gonna hunt him and gank him. Like, I don't think that's going to be your gameplay experience, not just on the day-to-day, but I mean, like, period whatsoever. To be going that far out where people are just going to be open ganking, I think you would have to know and then be planning that you're going to go out. And once again, you might just be wearing gray trash. So it's like, you're going to take my peasant rags. Great job, jerk.
I think that sounds awesome from a PvPer perspective and horrible from a non-PvP peer perspective. So no, that is not, especially for an explorer, that is not good enough. But I think what kind of may happen, like when we played Valheim, there is some reason why. I think because I could never figure out quite when DOP crew was playing, because you play so many other games. So it's not like you had a set time you were playing Valheim. So often you would be across the map somewhere doing some other stuff by the time I realized you guys were playing, and I tried to join you and catch up. But what I liked doing for Valheim, even though I wasn't playing right next to the DLP crew, is that I would go to the little village that you set up, and even if you weren't online, I'd go in and fill the coffers with all the stuff that I gathered when I wasn't around. So although I don't know that I would really be playing PAX Day for myself, I think I will probably be focused on some other game. But I might come in and just do something to, I don't know, it's not really decorate the village, but I might add some benefit to the village or to the home village the Theory Forge area or something like that. I might come in just to for an hour just to defend the. But I wouldn't consider it me really playing the game for me, because if I can't explore the whole world without having to flag for PvP, it's just not really a game I'm interested in.
I don't think you would have to flag for PvP. I think this is actually one
You
where
have
you would.
you auto flag when you go out into the wilderness.
Have they said that?
I think so.
Outside of the Heartlands is different layers of PvP-edness, and I wonder if that's going to be kind of like going from 1.0 security all the way to 0.0 nullsec in EVE, where if you stay in 0.6 to 1.0, you're generally going to be safe. Like, somebody might go out of their way to gank you, but they'll get, red flags. The space police will jump right on them. They'll be in trouble. You won't have the space police in this case, but I don't know, maybe there's going to be a bounty hunter system and they'll be immediately flagged as a target or whatever. It might be as you go further and further out into areas that are less established and have less people kind of set down, where you'll be finding more and more resistance, but it'll be just as much a PvP hindrance that other players will kill you as it might be that everything out there is so tough. A solo player, even in good gear, wouldn't be able to dodge and run away from all the enemies, and so you'd still need other people anyway. So there might be other limitations to the amount by which you can explore, just as a solo player, period, other players notwithstanding. So I'd like to know more about it and know if there's like kind of valence rings of reduced safety and security where people can still mostly be safe and secure. You mostly don't lose most of your stuff if you get ganked. The penalties are minor for you and, greater for them, sort of thing. And then as you go further out, it becomes closer to like full drop, full penalty sort of stuff.
Lethality, do you have anything on this? Like, you've been following this much closer than most of us. I don't think it's ever been explicitly stated that you have to flag for PvP anywhere. Is correct?
They haven't been very explicit to the extent where we can, I think, definitively say this is how it's going to work. They've said things like players will move about the world and they'll know how and what level of risk they're about to enter. So closer to what maybe Neuro said, there could be varying levels of security, whatever you want to call it. And I think, that's a little more organic, than I don't know if I would go, let's say, hiking in a grizzly infested area of Yellowstone on my own, for an example. Granted, those aren't controlled by players, those bears, but there's considerations like that. So hopefully they come up with something like that. I don't want it to be gamey, sort of like maybe Albion or Ashes. Like, well, if you're in this zone, then you just drop what you are carrying, but if you're in this zone, then you drop what's equipped, and that's too gamey for me, and I don't think they would do that here. So I'm not sure what they would do to increase that risk or position it, but so I don't think there's been a super definition on that yet. That's something everybody's kind of hanging on. That's one of the big rules and systems we're waiting to hear a lot about.
I have a question on that, actually. Have they said anything whatsoever about the respawn system, how players respawn, why they respawn, do they respawn?
There has not been a lot said about that. I know, there's been activity in the Discord, which, by the way, the devs are pretty responsive in there, but they have their sort of what they want to expose now going on. But no, I don't think we know about death, how that works in this world. What does it mean if you die? Do you die, or are you just defeated? Do you lose your stuff no matter who or what defeats you? I'm not sure we know much about that. There's definitely been some great, like I said, a lot of great dev answers, and some folks in the community have put together some all we know documents and some wiki stuff that's out there. But a lot of I think in some cases, the devs are going to allow for some play testing to flesh some of that stuff out too. They're not being committal because they want to see how some of these things work out before they say the next things,
Gotcha.
Yeah. That's, I don't know if they're just if they're just, like you said, not sure yet. So they're going to test some of this, or if it's trying to not alienate people initially. As we've seen things change with another game that we follow a little bit when it comes to PvP. But Diggs, I don't know that you would necessarily have to flag for PvP. So there could very well be systems in place, since there are no classes. You could certainly specialize as an explorer, and I assume would be able to have access to things like evasion, hiding, ways to sort of blend into the surroundings. I imagine that would be a part of something you could do. Because here's where I feel like this game is meant for you, is that because there are no quests and with that, no lore givers, typically we get a lot of our lore through quests. A lot of that is found out in the world. So really an explorer, someone who wants to explore, I feel like this is a gem for you, because you will actually, it's not just about finding a location that looks nice, which you can, peak to peak, stand on one mountain peak and see another and run to it. But like, you'll actually be able to explore a cave or an alcove somewhere that no one else has been and find some sort of lore. It could be how to cast a spell that no one's ever cast before, how to kill the dragon that no one has been able to kill before. And then you get to pick on, do I share this? Do I keep this? Do I sell this? Like, this system seems very good for you in that there's a lot of potential benefit or reward to being simply an explorer.
There is no reward that is worthy enough to compensate for why are you in this area if you don't want a PvP? So as soon as that happens, I'm going to rage quit, which is why I don't play these games.
I think
So,
one of the
that
interesting,
sounds very enticing, but if I go into an area looking for that stuff and I'm not in the mood for PvP and somebody PvPs and forces me to PvP, it doesn't matter. I could kill them. But if I don't want to PvP and I'm forced to have to PvP instead of searching for the stuff that I'm looking for, I'm going to rage quit.
Yeah. Do you feel though that, and I'm just sort of going through the thoughts in my head with this, do you feel though that would add value, like the risk you had to take to get and learn that information? You may be the only one who could translate those runes in that area, for example. So, you could be there with other people or whatever, but by making it more difficult somehow, whether that's with other players.
It's not about difficulty. I don't want to PvP.
Yeah.
So it's not a difficulty. It doesn't matter whether I win the battle or lose the battle, right, or even really what gets taken if I'm not in. So, like, if the PvP battle lasts for like 30 seconds and then there's not, the death penalties are not very great, and then I can just ignore that and go straight back into doing what I was doing without being bothered. I think that happened. I can't remember the game where that Bless Online. I think that's the way it worked on Bless Online. Like for Bless Online, I would encounter PvP like once a week, and I just let the person kill me. So it would last like 15 seconds, and then I just go back to doing whatever I was doing before I encountered them. So it was basically a non-encounter. So if it's like that,
I understand.
then
I play a lot of Sea of Thieves as an example, and nothing really irritates me more than when somebody steals the past 3 hours I just spent. Because I don't look at it as I'm stealing loot; they steal my time.
Exactly.
But I do feel that that's a different example. But I do feel that this risk or reward, because I often ask myself, I'm like, well, what if I was out there sailing and a kraken did the same thing to me? Would I be as angry? And for some reason, the answer is always no, even though it also wasted the last 3 hours to me. So I'm not sure.
It's a very good point.
The difference is that I'm smart enough to be able to avoid those situations, right? So,
Why
but
can't you do that with people?
because players are smarter than AI.
Yeah, but you can be
Players are
smarter than
smarter
them.
than the way AI are designed in these games.
But I'm saying
I should say.
the way the skills are set up, like you can be smarter than them. I'm pretty sure you would be able to find ways to traverse the world without being
I've
seen.
not encountered that in a game, in a multiplayer game yet. I've not encountered that. So yeah, they could come up with something different. I have a feeling that their stealth is not going to be against other players. It's not going to be that great, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I
I'm
totally respect it.
Yeah,
I know where you're coming
I'm
from.
going to test it. It's not like I'm, refusing to test. So we'll just see. I'm just saying, I have a feeling.
Well, I have a feeling this could be an entire show, and we don't want to spend.
I know. Yeah.
Maybe later. Maybe that can be show number 2. Actually, maybe we should work through more things before we try to convince Diggs of this.
Sure.
We've been down this road with Ashes already.
But by season 4, episode 10, we're going to have Diggs right where we want him.
Exactly.
No, I really do think if you get a chance to actually play test this feels more, from how I've gotten to know you over the last however many years it's been now, this seems more to your style outside of PvP, just from a pure exploration.
There's some other concerns too, but that's one of the big ones. But yeah, what's next on the list?
Oh, there's no specific list.
Did we talk enough about the developer backgrounds? I mean, I know the company was founded, and this to me says probably most of all, we talked a little bit about how much experience there is, the sort of the tenure. It's not, especially if you go back and you watch sort of their reveal video, there was the trailer, but there was also about an 8-minute video that they put out that had many of the founding devs, all of which or not all of which, but the ones in the video, for the most part, originated from the original CCP team. And when I say the original CCP team, I mean the one from 2001 when they were forming. The game director of this game was the founder of CCP. I don't want to butcher his name. Harrodson is his last name, and I'm sure there's a better way to say that. But experience, and that doesn't mean they're trying to rebuild even a fantasy setting, but there's a good chance that they have sensibilities and things that they think how these games should work, and in that video he talks himself does talk quite a bit about what they think the holy grail of MMO design is and how it should work, and they're trying to find that sort of happy medium here. So as far as the developer experience, not just the experience, but the I guess the orientation they're coming from, is gives a lot of hope to this. And then, I think one of the things we can get into a little bit here next maybe is the whole technology approach, the cloud native, what benefits that bring and how that could give us things in a game like this that we really haven't had before. I mean, it's pretty interesting. And Eve, of course, well known for its single shard world and all that kind of thing. But I think there are some technology moves they can finally make now, which can give us things we just haven't had before. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not sure what those would be. So not from a CCP standpoint, I don't think there's anything enticing for me from there that I can think of. What is enticing, and maybe too enticing in a very problematic way these days, is it's Unreal Engine 5, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's pretty.
So, that's awesome. One of my concerns is so many of these games are using Unreal 5, so it looks awesome. Like, I would love to run around that world. That doesn't tell us how good the gameplay is going to be, but it when they show you the videos, it's like, yeah, I want to explore that world because it's just so beautiful. So there's definitely that aspect that they have going for it.
At least the quality of the world isn't going to be the reason people don't play games anymore. Now it's like, well, yeah, they all have the same graphics more or less, and that's cool, but this game just sucks. I don't like the mechanics. That game, though, man, they got like this right and that right, but subs too much, and like this game and blah blah. It's going to be. I'm hoping it's going to be that sort of like a a wealth of good choices sort of thing, that there's so many good Unreal 5 MMOs. And likewise, I think the other thing I like about that is kind of a, not necessarily a streamlining, but kind of a proof for bigger studios, ever growing and larger studios, that maybe it's time to just use Unreal 5. Like, you know, from what I understand, there was some hiring about unannounced project for Bungie for Unreal 5, and then they announced Marathon. So it's like, all right, you know, Ashes of Creation, Unreal 5, they're chasing the updates. I just saw something Unreal released for everybody to use, a fully procedural, beautiful world designing toolkit set. It's like, golly, use that and the Ultra Human or whatever it's called in there to make your photorealistic people. You can make an entire beautiful looking game or a cinema, you know, masterpiece or whatever, just using the things that are built into that damn engine. So yeah, that's something that's exciting to me. The one metahuman, thank you. The one thing to me that's a little bit of an oddity is that because of the performance and high hardware requirements of Unreal 5, it's going to be the big one that like forces upgrades for a lot of people. I think when we're looking at the next generation of consoles, they're going to have to be things that are spec'd to run Unreal 5 really well, which means they're probably going to be really, really hot, or I don't know what sort of wacky things they're going to have to do to those poor consoles. But, you know, they'll get there.
To cloud gaming? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things, you know, I think a lot of these days when we hear cloud gaming, we hear or we think mostly that it's going to be games that are just streamed to you from a more centralized, you know, system. And in a lot of cases, what we have today, that is the case. And, you know, there are things that come with that, like latency or other potential problems between you and the computer that's playing your game. You know, anything could happen. But honestly, and I've been messing around with GeForce now. They have a free tier, which the queue takes forever to get through. But once you do, I'm pretty impressed with just, you know, the cloud streaming aspect of services like that. I haven't really messed with Microsoft's xCloud, but I hear it's pretty good, and they do that through a browser. I hear the browser performs better than their native version, which is interesting. But beyond that, yeah, I mean, cloud native, I think, brings some other things. So besides streaming the game, like we've talked about it in that reveal, not the trailer, but the video, they talk about targeting other platforms. They have a minute or little video clip where it shows they're playing on a tablet, and you know, and they're very clear about focusing on the PC version first, and they're distributing on Steam. So that's one of the first questions I asked when the Discord opened is, you know, there are a lot of advantages to cloud native and we'll talk more about those, I guess, other advantages, but, you know, by releasing a client of any sort that suggests a bit of a hybrid, and they answered it that way, you know, like, you know, and we don't know what that means exactly yet, but there's clearly going to be a hybrid. There's going to be some level of client we're going to download, you know, and there's going to be some level of it, you know, sort of remote you know, client potentially on the server metal as well. You know, it's not going to be a pure 100%, I guess, cloud client. And maybe that'll depend on which platform, you know, but it's intriguing because another big thing about cloud, you know, cloud gaming is, when it's pure, right, it can virtually eliminate cheating. You know, very hard to do some of the things players like to do these days, to manipulate the client and everything. They just can't do it if they don't have access to it. And so that was another part of what they answered to me a little bit is there are trade-offs with their approach. So I assume it's going to be hybrid, but I'm very interested to learn what that could bring in the future. And sort of the final point I'll touch on with that is there's also a lot to do with, I guess, the compute power available for cloud gaming, where a client and server are running sort of concurrently in the same, you know, virtual hardware configuration. We can have things more precise physics. We can have arms that are shaped like arms, not a big hitbox that everybody, so whether those translate really well or not in a multiplayer game, we'll see, but it does give them a lot more horsepower that they could do things. And there's a lot of stuff I don't know. I'm by no means an expert, but I am excited about the cloud aspects.
Yeah. The things that I saw they've specifically mentioned, yeah, you're right. One was the power behind it, so they can increase their player counts. When you kind of talked about a single shard sort of arrangement or a very large shard, I think I saw somewhere they're targeting like 10,000 players per server.
I think 20,000. They've quoted as saying 20,000. Yeah.
So very large, partly due to this cloud native process, but then the crossplay also because of how it's being done. So I put in chat that, this is great. If it's a great game, I can play at work. I have a tablet at work. That's my own personal tablet. I can just, on my phone. But then the other was also, to Neuro's point, targeting. They specifically talk about being able to target not just high-end systems, but low-end. And then the ease of just developing for one runtime. So rather than having to try to push it to PlayStation and Xbox and Steam all at once, or Android, iOS, it's really just under one hood. So sounds fascinating. Again, something we can probably do an entire show to again, the history of and where we're at now. Mm-hmm. In about 15 minutes. So this has gone by quick. I did want to, we started to talk a little bit about social sandbox, kind of what is this? And I thought how they define that was very interesting. There's a specific, I forget which video it is that they posted. It might've been the PC gaming one, but they talk about, if you were to join World of Warcraft today, as a brand new player, it's going to take you a very long time, right, to catch up to your friends and to be able to actually do things with them. Or EVE Online, I think, Neuro, you had talked a little bit about their passive leveling system.
Mm-hmm. Perpetually behind. I think they might have made a different system at some point, like a decade later, but I had checked out since then.
When they talk about social sandbox, one of the things that they said right away is that new players will be a big commodity to guilds, to clans. Like a new player will be able to play right alongside someone who's been there for 6 months, 6 years, whether that's raiding in a dungeon, whether that's okay, you're going to go cut down trees, harvest coal because we need that to create whatever we're crafting. That the social sandbox, they specifically say they are trying to break down barriers to player interaction rather than having them be present, which I thought is a very interesting take. A little bit different than what I'm used to, anyways.
It kind of makes me think of like Foxhole or PlanetSide 1, I guess 2 a little bit as well. But the idea of everybody's got the same attributes, relatively speaking. You might be more specialized in one thing or another. Maybe for Foxhole, I think it's more just player skill sort of stuff. But PlanetSide, you'd have your certifications. You'd slowly earn more of them, which would allow you to diversify your arsenal, but it didn't give you better weapons than the players that have been playing a while. It didn't give you better vehicles. Later, they added some stuff that maybe was a little kind of breaking that, but then, it had already kind of gone to obscurity by that point. And then with Foxhole, I think about that too as a good example of what I might expect the building outside the PvP or the PvE area to be like. That it's something where what the players build and what they can hold and what isn't torn down by enemies and other players is the structures and infrastructure and spawn points and factories and things that they get to keep. And so long as you can continue maintaining your entire supply line and everything along the way, and one of those forts doesn't have a mutiny and start screwing everything up for everyone else, then, you're able to, extend your supply line out further and further. And yeah, it's going to be full PvP, and if tempers flare, or you might have a couple dudes duke it out with swords in the middle of in the middle of operations or whatever, and be a couple of jerks about things. And, it's just like real life, except people respawn, maybe. I don't know. But that's the sort of thing that I'm thinking about with it, that, they don't mean for it to be, here you are in the world, you're a character who is naked and skillless and broke, and it's going to take a long time for you to be able to build up and do anything. Instead, I think it's going to be maybe a little bit more like, Ultima Online. You got a few skills that you pick. So you start with a little bit of this. You start with a little bit of gear, maybe. You can start doing something right off the bat. But when you start playing the game, you'll start really kind of figuring out what you want to do. Like, that's kind of more what I expect. And as you get better at stuff, you might be better at combat and stuff. But if somebody throws a exploding barrel at you that does 100 damage, you're going to die. It's, still going to kill you.
So, kind of weaving together a few ideas that Phantom has said with a few ideas that Nero has said earlier. I don't think I would want to be the known as the decorator, the best decorator in the game. One of the things I wanted to be in EverQuest, I wanted to be the unsummoner, because they had a you could whole thing where you could summon, things, but you also have this one skill where you could unsummon. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be the best in the world of going around and unsummoning people's summons. For Ethereal, one of the things I was hoping to pursue there was their kind of demonology, summoning things, cultist kind of stuff on that server, and kind of have enough support for that area of magic grows on whatever world we're on. And if we're doing something like that, thinking about discovering lore. So if I'm out exploring and I'm discovering lore about demonology, and what I really want to do on our world is, increase demonology, so that our village, that's what our village does. We excel at summoning and serving demons. And my skill set would be involved in teaching other people. I would be teaching the new players that, because we don't have NPCs to teach that, right? So I'm the one who's discovered the tech for that, whatever the demon tech for that is. And that would kind of be my role, right? Is at least within the Heartlands, I would be teaching our people, whoever comes and joins us, to summon demons and serve the demons. And if that just so happens to conflict with other people who hate demons and they're trying to stop us from summoning demons, well, in that case, we might have to have some PvP, because they're trying to stop me from doing what I do. Right? Not because, hey, I love PvP and, you are content for me because I love PvP, but literally, they're they're the opposite of what I like to do. Maybe that's, I think for EverQuest Next, the concept was, because I normally am using stealth, and in EverQuest Next, shadow energy is what supports stealth abilities, and there you would have to siphon life energy. The dark elves would siphon life energy from the dryads, convert that into shadow energy. And I was like, well, I mean, if I have to kill some dryads in order to get my stealth at its highest, I'll have to kill some dryads. And if somebody tries to stop me from killing dryads because they're a druid, I might have to kill them. Not because I'm interested in PvP, but because I'm really interested in stealth. And that's what I have to do to maximize my stealth. So, if it can do that kind of emergent gameplay, I'd be interested in seeing how that works out.
The interesting part of no levels is, as you continuously teach new people, you're going to build up your skill in that summoning and continuously improve your abilities as you teach others, which is their sort of progression system, which is something I have been wanting for quite a long time.
Yeah, I think in general, what I hope, and I always think about in games is to have information be valuable as a commodity somehow, and not make it feel super gamey, not have it be objectified as a thing that you carry in its knowledge, but some other way that you could transfer knowledge, or just the information. Not to bring up Star Citizen, but that's a big core pillar of their economy, is this idea someday maybe that we'll have this information about an explorer that went and found a mining deposit, and that becomes information that's valuable on the open market. And in a world like that, where it's persistent, you're going to mine it out. It only exists until it's gone. It's not going to respawn. All that idea becomes more interesting. And with Pax Dei, it sounds like, they haven't said anything like that about spawning or any of that, but it sounds like the world to be large enough to, not just large enough, but interesting and in depth enough, where something like that, where information could be valuable in its own right. And I hope that be the case.
There was one also funny little clue too that they dropped. It's an easy one to miss, but I kind of correlated a little bit. They said you will be able to build in the Heartlands. They said you won't be able. We aren't going to tell you about building out in the PvP area, but they also said you can't build underground. And I don't know if they just mean no basements, or if there are actual underground, like depth terrain layer, cavernous spaces, sort of things to explore. So maybe I'm reading too much into it. Maybe they're just saying buildings go up, they don't go down. Either way, we can theory craft. That's what we're here for.
Exactly. Yeah. Every time that kind of came up, I always interpreted that as there is no player terraforming necessarily. But I'm guessing the devs at least will have the ability to build underground, whether that's dungeons or caves or something. But I don't know if we will necessarily. So hopefully that's not a super constraint, like you're saying.
It sounds like that's been part of their procedural tools, that really what they've spent the bulk of their last 2 years doing is creating these tools so that there are cave systems from what I think they actually show. There's a 22-second video of emerging from a cave. The perspective of seeing the mountains across from you and the trees down below you. You can build on water, but I'm certain there's explorable areas down there. The tools they've created sound fun too, and I can't wait to do a show about that because there was they talk about smart systems, and one of them, I think he's maybe a visual effects guy, was talking about, in most games the environment tells the player what's around them. So there's butterflies in the field, that the environment is telling the player this, but in their system it's sort of different, that the player, whatever you want to call it, client, the player is determining what is appropriate to be around them. So if they enter into an environment that says, hey, there should be butterflies here, then it spawns butterflies. It's just a very interesting, seems like an effective way of doing things.
Yeah. So. Instead of a static placement of everything that you'll always see in the distance and always see around whenever night and day, plus or minus, if it gets turned off by certain things, it'll be that they don't need to run the assets and worry about the extra cycles and anything on stuff that is in an area that nobody's actually in. But once you get to an area, the things that you should be seeing relative to the conditions of the area, possibly other features. Maybe if you've been eating zombies and been bit by zombies or something like that, you start going crazy and you're starting to get like some speckles and some weird lines, and it's a little fuzzy around the edges and stuff. And that's the environmental effect that you're starting to get as you go into an area. Instead of butterflies, you're seeing like, mosquitoes and gnats flying around you and stuff. That could be another way they play with it, but the butterflies was the one that was kind of the example he specifically provided.
Well, we are almost at the end, so I did want us to sort of wrap up, since this is our first show, with sort of everyone's expectations or what you find most interesting, or not in the case of Diggs, to see where we could end up 10 shows from now, 20 shows from now, sort of what our expectations were, how did our thoughts change over time. And I'm going to actually start. I'm very excited about this, and Nura, kind of a lot of it goes back to something you said earlier, talking about UE5 and how everything looks so good anymore, and sort of how do you distinguish things from each other. And I think that is where you will see a lot of the growth and the popularity come up. That's where Ashes, when we started that trek six years ago, it was all about nodes and sort of this different system that just didn't exist anywhere else. And Pax Dei checks a lot of that as well. When they talk about how they're handling lore, how they have no NPCs, how the characters do not level in a sort of traditional way, it really checks a lot of very interesting boxes for me. The other thing that I find very interesting is how, again, back to the lore, is how they sort of have gone about doing this. There's a specific example where they talk about, we're not going to tell you how to kill the basilisk. You're going to know it's over there, but we're not going to tell you how to kill it. You could very well go Wikipedia this and find, what is it that basilisks, in folklore, what are they, or myths or whatever, fairy tales, like how do you go about killing this? And you could then learn that process through sort of this other media. So it's a lot of just very interesting systems here that I think fit a lot of what I've been looking for. And yes, the world looks absolutely stunning. I tend to fit more into sort of the medieval time frame. While I love the story making of EVE Online, I'm just not a space person. It's never been my thing, so I've never jumped into it, and so I'm hopeful this will actually take that up. And then the knowledge is valuable. Knowledge is power. That is something I don't think you will find, if that holds up. I'm not sure it will. I don't think you find that anywhere else, because in this day and age, data mining, Wikipedia's, once something is known, it's out there, it's on Discord, it's on Twitter, it's somewhere. So I'm if there's design methods work out to where, yes, knowledge actually is power, I think that is invaluable. That's a very interesting dynamic to sort of pursue. I will end there.
They'd have to do something that makes character knowledge different from player knowledge.
Well, and they specifically in some of these videos talk about that they also feel like player knowledge is power as well, not just character knowledge. They actually do distinguish between the two. But again, that's probably something we can explore more later on.
Mm-hmm.
I think my expectation. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Well, I was going to say real quick, because Phantom mentioned this in the chat. Everything you see can be harvested is another big positive, he said. And I would love to have that. I'd love to see that have impact for something like alchemy or whatever kind of potions or chemistry we're making, so that we have to figure out what all the stuff we're harvesting actually does and is useful for. But when we experiment with that, it makes some logical sense, and we can go through and, chart that out, even in game, whatever.
Yeah.
This flower will do this flower can create this potion, all that stuff. Yeah.
In those first few months, you're not going to have a clue. You're going to log in. You're going to say, hey, I can pick this. I have no idea what it does, but I'm going to pick it anyways. Mm-hmm. Neuro?
Yeah, I think 2025 is going to be the announcement for the announcement date for the final open beta. Just being realistic here.
I got where you're going now. I was like, okay.
In 2025, they will announce when they will announce the open beta. It's just being, a little generous here.
Yes. I have been in development 4 years, but
yeah, well, great. Then it has at least one more, plus or minus. But my expectation is that there's going to be kind of a small information drip over the next few years. There's going to be fits and spurts of increased information being put out there when they have players doing testing, and then probably after the tests, unless they're planning on doing more and more constant testing, I would imagine there's going to be a lot of cool, everybody had this cool time, here's everybody, let's all talk about what we saw and what happened and how it worked, and kind of string that along as long as you can until it's time to announce the next alpha and playable phase and getting feedback and all that sort of stuff. The one thing that I hope they do is make sure they get a good balance between time spent testing with players testing, doing that like semi-live development, semi-live service sort of thing, gathering data, and a good balance of not doing that when they don't have to, in order to keep heads down and focused, and maybe have 2-3 months worth of builds where the engine is just flat out broken in some way until certain things are finally bricks have been laid back down in engineering to get the next feature in that you can then do the next test with. That keep the information flow going. Don't overpromise. Don't have to go too far too fast with too much, but I'm sure they've got a lot they can share and kind of dangle out there and tell little stories and stuff. That's kind of what I'm kind of hoping, expecting to see here is with how they do it. And if it is just going to be like, here's a couple of tests and they're not going to show anything again until we're doing the beta before release, well, cool. That's a cool way to do it too. If you're able to get everything you need from that one test, and maybe keep a small group of testers and people around to help give you a little extra guidance. And then the third thing I want them to balance is work life, personal life, because golly, MMO development can get real bad and grindy sometimes, and I hope they're able to have the sense and the wherewithal to avoid this one. 15+ year veterans making up a lot of the studio. I think they know, sleep helps, and like spending time with your family, and like getting to actually cook your eggs and toast before the first meeting and stuff. I'm hoping they're going to prioritize and take care of themselves along the way, because that really matters in MMO development.
I don't remember who, but one of the developers on the Mainframe website, their quote actually says crunch has no place in video games. So they do seem to be taking wellness seriously. So
Sleep is your friend. Phantom says sandbox. We don't truly want sandboxes as sandboxy as much as we think we do. Especially not so much that there's no NPCs, I think, but we'll see.
I mean, I've always said that. I said that about Landmark. I don't know if you remember, 10 years ago now, that I don't think that this will be as cool as everyone thinks it will be when you're relying on non-professional people to create the content. You will find really good creators, but they can only do so much. And so I still say that's my sort of prove me wrong from a truly sandbox environment. So
Also, sometimes they're not on when you want them to be on. So
lethality. You want to go?
Yeah, sure. So my piece maybe will be a little different. Like, I'm looking forward to all of the virtual world stuff and the system stuff, but I think what sort of just, I guess, piggybacking on a little bit is the team that they've got. They've admitted at times that they're smaller than a typical MMO team, and they're happy with that. That's what they want to be. And they've answered questions in ways like, "Hey, is there going to be sailing?" And he goes, "Well, that's a great idea, but we do want to ship the game sometime." So they seem to have a good team response to things that indicate the scope is being managed, and they've got goals and plans. And if you'll notice, they're not crowdfunded. They're not asking for any money right now. And they're well funded through companies like Andreessen Horowitz and Riot Games. So I guess that's what I'm looking forward to the most. Like you said, Neuro, I'd be fine if they kept it closed testing. I don't, through the nth degree until we're just really ready for the marketing push to launch. I think too many, especially in this genre, people were getting burned out by constantly playing things that are not ready to be consumed by the end users at this point. And so that's my hope. And so far it's laid out like we maybe call it the good old days. We hear about a game. Sure, there's a 3-year wait between announcement and launch, but it doesn't have to be 3 years of pain for everyone going through it. It doesn't have to be early access. It doesn't have to be crowdfunded. Hopefully this is one of those. It's going to launch proper and they do it the right way. They manage it how they want to manage it. And so far so good.
Yeah.
Diggs, I don't think you've really said anything. Is there anything you're actually looking forward to?
I do just want to echo something real quick. Yes, we need MMOs, these beautiful MMOs to release. That needs to happen at some point.
Agreed.
Well, Unreal Engine 5. When I'm playing Diablo, I'm not playing Diablo because I like the exploration. I'm not Diablo 4 specifically. I'm not playing even so much for co-op play because we mostly solo. What gets me to continue playing Diablo 4 moment after moment after moment are the cutscenes with my cool characters in them. I'd love to have Phantom's characters and Zog's characters in there with me, and the cutscenes, but because they have cool looking characters too. But the graphics on those cutscenes with my character as a protagonist is just awesome. So that's one thing I'm definitely looking forward to seeing. I hope they have cutscenes, and really what I want to do is make movies of these fantasy novels that I'm trying to play out. So, if we had more camera control for that, that would be really nice. Be able to disable the HUD so I don't have to have the HUD in my movies. That would be good. But it's going to be beautiful. And like I said, I think both Phantom and Euro together there's the potential for that to be true. If I could do something like find some kind of school of magic to focus on and make that permeate throughout the world and teach other people, our whole village will be learning how to help promote that across the land. That could be fun. I think that would definitely get me trying to play, and I might even stay more in the village for that, just so I can train the newbies who come in. That could be enticing for sure.
Well, they do say in their system, you do not start out as a necromancer. You do not start out as a sorcerer. You become one over time as you improve your skills. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for that part. Magic is real, but it's mysterious and rare in the world. So that should be cool.
Oh, the moment they start talking about, you could find the way to cast a spell out in a cave somewhere from a long forgotten group. It's like, okay, I'm kind of hooked there. I'm like, all right, it's done. Let's go. When's Alpha? I'm ready. I'll give you money. I got money. You want money? Well, let's start. I'll be your friend. I'll be in
the real goofy, wacky things like eat 3 of these mushrooms and you'll puke on the ground. Now you've got to make sure you slip in the puke with 1 foot up, and when you fall on the ground, the spell will be cast.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, all right, magic.
A lot of people immediately thought about the Star Wars Galaxy's Jedi path around the original release time. Like, what do we do? I don't know. But that kind of made it cool. It was frustrating for a lot of reasons. But on the other hand, it was also pretty cool.
I mean, I kind of think about it was a novel I remember reading as a kid, The Legend of Nightfall. Some people are born as wizards. Some people eat the still beating heart of a wizard out of their chest and steal their magic.
There might be
Very
a way to do
exciting.
that. We don't know yet, though. It sounds like if you look through any book, any sort of fable, fairy tale, any kind of story within that area, the sort of European medieval time frame, it's probably going to show up somewhere in Pax Dei in some form. I'll say the one thing, if they pull from outside of there, I don't know why I was thinking of this today, but I would love to see Jeepers, Jeepers Creepers. Do you ever seen that movie? That actually stems from like a belief, I think in South America. But anyways, like I would love to see something like that in this. But the blending of sort of real world into fantasy world, I think is also part of what pulls me in. So.
Agreed. That'd be awesome.
I have a feeling that PAX Day is too Eurocentric for me as well.
I knew
but
you
we
might
can
say
talk
that.
about that.
Yeah,
next time.
I agree with you. And like, it's very like New Testament Apocrypha with the lore and the naming and things. For me, that's just like,
Now,
please come up with something new, please, please.
Now, when you look, well, and we can talk more about this another time, maybe when we talk about the world or about maps. When you look at the heartlands, the places that they've mentioned, there are several. There's 4 main heartlands, and then there's 4 others. That when you look at the names, at least that they've given them, very much not sort of, France, Germany, European, like very much more so Middle East. Like there's going to be like a lot later on. I think the problem you might have, Diggs, right now, or Neuro, is that it sounds like they're only going to release with one main area first. So I don't know how quickly you would get into doing those sorts of things, or if you could even create a character based on that new environment or not. I guess we would see over time. I would assume yes, but I'm getting into another show. So
That's right. We can talk about that next time.
all right.
We could certainly be here for another 45 minutes.
Yes, we could. I haven't even talked about collecting books and not letting people have them and trying to sell them. The one thing I don't think I'm looking forward to is politics. The stuff that will come up with city building. I'm not super excited about that, but we'll see how that goes. So.
God, what's going to ruin a fantasy experience than a homeowners association?
I mean,
your houses must be brown or gray.
We've had that discussion in the Discord a little bit. Like, I don't know, that height restriction is a little too much over there. I'm not going to live here. I'm going somewhere else.
You're the one that started Castles and Crap Shacks. So.
Yes, I did, but it became Content Creations later.
Okay.
Well, you do have to follow physics or your creation will fall over. And it is brought to you again, the thing I mentioned with Eve, that one of the stories that sparked a humongous war was somebody got tired of their clan's condescension and the way they spoke to them and told them to do things. So they set into motion their destruction, which I would assume you could potentially do here as well. So. But that being said, thank you all for joining us for our very first episode. This will not be weekly, just because we still do have Ashes of Creation to follow as well. And most likely, we will have our next show probably in like 3 weeks. Next week, we will not do anything. The week after, as a plug, Stephen Sharif will be joining us on the Ashen Forge for Sunday. So that'll be a lot of fun. And that will come on the heels.
July 9th. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that will come on the heels of a freehold and presumably crafting stream. So hopefully we'll have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. But
good timing for that one. Yeah.
Yes. Our 100th episode. So we have a ways to go here with our first, but I'm sure with time we will get there. So everyone have a great rest of your Sunday, wherever you're at. Have a great week. We will be back in 2 weeks with the Ashen Forge.
Damn. Have a good one, everybody.
Everybody.
Pax out.